celebrate. Pumpkin pies, turkey, green bean casserole, small children tracing their fingers on construction paper in order to turn them into a turkey dressed as pilgrims and Indians. But that is not the Thanksgiving we celebrate. No, this is the Thanksgiving we celebrate. Right here, right now. This is what we have to be thankful for. It's why we call it Thanksgiving. This is it. There's not an official date for the now trending Friendsgiving. For me, it is you watching this broadcast. You are my friends. I'm single and basically have no family to speak of. And you're watching this broadcast, you are my family. You are here. And for you, I give thanks. And forget for a minute all that leftist diatribe. Yes, I have been to Plymouth Rock and protested on Thanksgiving too. And it has taken me a while to embrace celebrating Thanksgiving. Do you know what language the natives spoke in 1621 when they first laid eyes on the Pilgrims? English. Thank you, Squantum. A name that should be spoken at every Thanksgiving, but it is not. You see, the Wampanoag had been trading with Europeans for a century by the time the Pilgrims got here. The Pilgrims had never heard a word of Wampanoag in their lives. There were, in fact, more native people living in North America that had been to Europe than Europeans in North America. It's true. Less than 10 years after Columbus's voyage, the first dozen Native Americans, not that they would have called themselves that, from what we now call New England, were off visiting Europe and learning European languages. Now granted, this was not a sightseeing trip that they chose to make like the Pilgrims did, and few would return. But by the 1600s, native slaves were the chief component of the America's gross national product, North and South America, and that's largely due to the Spanish, but that's a different story. In 1605, the English captain John Weymouth returned to Europe with a payload of 20 Indians chained in his cargo, and among them was Squantum, the very Indian that first approached the starving Pilgrims. And he managed to return to New England as part of the cargo of Captain John Smith, yes, that John Smith, in 1614 on Smith's first voyage to America. However, members of Smith's crew had different ideas, and Squantum was again sold into slavery and freed by friars in Spain because he declared himself a Catholic. And then he was educated, at least in the ways of the European, and brought back as a guide in 1619 and an interpreter. He had actually hung out in London as an English-speaking freed slave. But this is not the Thanksgiving we celebrate. Understand that when the Pilgrims arrived in December of 1620, which is, in case you hadn't noticed, cold in New England, things were not going well. Poor piloting had wasted precious time, and it was late in the year, and the first winter was not pretty, and the Pilgrims were starving. They spent their first few weeks surviving by sending out armed parties who stumbled upon the remains of an Indian village that had been abandoned, largely due to diseases that were already running rampant and decimating the native population. And they broke into homes and stole stashes of food that had been left there. Survival. And that is certainly not the Thanksgiving that we celebrate. Even after the Plymouth colony had a good year under its belt, the Pilgrims were not doing very well, and neither were the Wampanoag. They were at a state of war with the Narragansett. The Pilgrims had something the Wampanoag could use: guns. Squantum and friends showed up saying, you guys look pretty hungry. Maybe you should eat some of these pumpkins we raised. And they also suggested, maybe y'all should get over that weird religious aversion you have to eating shellfish. Because we got plenty of lobster. We got plenty of them running around on the beaches. And while you're at it, those guns you got, we could use a few of them. The Pequot are really starting to piss us off. Yes, the first Thanksgiving was indeed an arms deal. And that is not the Thanksgiving we celebrate. And so began a series of alliances, allegiance, affirmations that all seemed to end up with the Europeans on top. We all know this shit. Anyone who has ever watched the History Channel for more than an hour knows this. But still, I say, Happy Thanksgiving. For that is not the Thanksgiving we celebrate. I like to think of Thanksgiving as, well, an almost pagan ritual where we can celebrate the bounty of this life. Give thanks for all we do have, and frankly, we do have a lot. My favorite Thanksgiving, the one I do celebrate, took place when I was living in Canada, where they don't celebrate Thanksgiving. Oh, okay, they do, only on a different date and for different reasons. I was living as a street musician in a tourist town in the early 90s, living in a shack in a lumber yard with my then wife, Amanda Stark. We were a duo. We called ourselves Stark Raving Chandler, paying literally $100 a month to Canadian to live there with a wood stove. Things were bleak. I know. I mean, compared to the winter that spent by the Pilgrims, I had it pretty good. But when viewed through the rose-colored Ray-Bans of today's standards, that little wood-burning stove did not work very well, and bad weather in a tourist town meant no money for a big meal. And we were hungry. Now, I know you think of Canada as a socialist country and all, so I could have gotten some kind of assistance, but no, I was a frostback, an undocumented U.S. American worker working at below-standard wages to entertain the tourist class. In short, no Thanksgiving for Stark Raving Chandler. But my friends, a miracle transpired. The Canadian Postal Service. You see, because they don't celebrate Thanksgiving, they deliver their mail on the fourth Thursday in November. And my mother had timed it perfectly. She was distraught by the fact that I was living in a land with no Thanksgiving. And she mailed me a can of turkey meat and a box of stovetop stuffing and a jar of cranberry sauce and a can of green beans, cream of mushroom soup, and a can of those French's French fried onions that are only good for one thing: Thanksgiving. Holy moly. That was the best Thanksgiving meal I ever had. We do have a lot to be thankful for. And why not be that? Thankful. So to you, my friends, I say happy Thanksgiving, because that is the Thanksgiving Day we celebrate. Thank you for gathering around. It's Thanksgiving Day. My name's Chris Chandler. I appreciate it. I told that story last year. I'll probably tell it again next year. I'm working on another Thanksgiving story. It'll be coming up soon. Maybe I'll break it out next year. But I only get to tell that story once a year. So thanks for listening to me. I really appreciate it. Y'all have a good day.